We had a picture-perfect life. We had a beautiful, precious daughter. That picture was smashed into shards October 17th, 2009, when Morgan was murdered. What do you do with shards? Well, if you are very determined and creative, you can take the pieces, the shards of your picture, and reassemble them. It's no longer the same picture. Perhaps now it's an abstract mosaic, but it still can have beauty that will sustain you. You don't find happiness in a life. You make it. And it took some time for us to realize we had to relinquish the old life and build anew. You don't get over it, but you can get past it.
That's Gil Harrington, the mother of Morgan Dana Harrington, the 20-year-old Virginia Tech student who disappeared from the John Paul Jones Arena while attending a Metallica concert at the University of Virginia in 2009.
And so I remember taking Morgan back to Tech. Jill was actually in Zambia, and we had lunch in Blacksburg, and it was just such a neat thing to see Morgan mature and decide that she was going to be a teacher, and she had moved beyond the struggles I think that kids have during those teenage years, and of course Morgan's life ended, but we were also able, as Jill said, she started Help Save the Next Girl.
That's Dan Harrington, Morgan's father. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. On October 17, 2009, a Saturday, Morgan Harrington joined a friend for a roughly 150-mile drive from Virginia Tech to the University of Virginia in Charlottesville to attend a Metallica concert. Morgan, a junior and an education major, had dressed in a black t-shirt with Pantera on the front in tan letters, a Swarovski chain necklace, a black miniskirt with black tights, and black knee-high boots. Along the way, they stopped at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia, to pick up another friend. As one of the opening acts, the band Lamb of God, was playing, Morgan got up from her seat and told her friends that she was headed to the restroom. Somehow, for reasons that are still unclear, Morgan ended up outside the arena, which had a no re-entry on exit policy. When Morgan didn't return, her friends called her cell phone at 8:48 p.m., and she told them that she had been locked out of the arena, that she would find her way home, and that they should not worry. She had no cash because she had given hers to one of her friends to buy concert memorabilia. Later, witnesses would see Morgan around 9:30 p.m., thumbs up, attempting to hitchhike on a nearby bridge. By the next day, no one had heard from Morgan, and the University of Virginia Police and the Virginia State Police put out a description of her. They described a 5'6", 120-pound young woman, and they described all the clothes she was wearing. The police said in the announcement that they were, quote, pursuing numerous leads. By Monday, Morgan's parents, who lived in the southwest Virginia town of Roanoke, were at a press conference in front of the University of Virginia Police headquarters in Charlottesville, asking for Morgan to come home if she could hear their message and for the public to find leads. Her parents told the newspaper that disappearing was atypical for the young woman who her mom said, quote, calls home almost every day and asks things like, how do you make macaroni and cheese? 2 days after Morgan disappeared, a University of Virginia lacrosse player found her purse along a fence in a parking lot adjacent to the arena. In it were her student ID, driver's license, and debit card. Over the course of the next day, Morgan's cell phone, with its back cover off and its batteries gone, was found in another parking lot, one that local taxicab drivers had used as a staging area on the night of the concert. Although kept from the public, a month later, the local police had responded to an apartment complex where a shirt believed to have been Morgan's was found. What the public didn't know is that soon after, the Virginia Department of Forensic Sciences matched a DNA profile on the shirt to an unknown suspect in a 2005 rape in Fairfax County, Virginia, and found a human hair they believe belonged to Morgan. On January 26, 2010, 101 days later, Morgan's remains were discovered by a local farmer who was looking at a remote section of his property. Several clothing items and jewelry were recovered with her remains. Her boots, leggings, underwear, and the necklace were not present. The first line of Morgan's obituary in the Roanoke Times read, quote, "The world has lost its best hugger." It wasn't until September 2014, when an 18-year-old University of Virginia student, Hannah Graham, disappeared from downtown Charlottesville, that the police were able to home in on the suspect. Hannah was a high-achieving student athlete who was described as trusting, sociable, and enthusiastic for life. But this time, police had surveillance video, and a witness saw her being followed by a man who, according to additional video, had been going to different bars that night, harassing different women. The evidence suggested that the man, Jesse L. Matthew Jr., had been stalking Charlottesville that night with his cell phone on airplane mode, like a predator. Later, he would confess to the murders of Harrington and Graham, whose remains were found in a rural, wooded area not too far from Morgan's. As the news reports emerged, it became clear that Matthew, who was working as a taxi cab driver and as a high school football coach, had been preying on women across Virginia for years. In addition to Morgan, Hannah, and the 2005 rape, officials at Christopher Newport University had opened a disciplinary file on him for a reported sexual assault that happened in 2003, while he was briefly at the school as a student and also a member of the football team. Another woman had accused him of raping her at Liberty University, a Christian school in Lynchburg, Virginia, that's been embroiled in a scandal about covering up sexual assault. It appears as if the system failed Morgan, Dana, and each of these women. Morgan's parents, Gil and Dan, began a nonprofit organization as a conduit to spread information and promote personal safety. That organization, Help Save the Next Girl, has grown to include a national team and chapters at colleges, high schools, and middle schools. The group works with many who focus on safety and violence prevention, from Taking Back the Night rallies to bring awareness to women's issues on campuses, to safety presentations for Girl Scouts. Jill wrote a book with one of Morgan's teachers, an artist named Jane Lillian Vance. Today, we're going to discuss Morgan's life, her disappearance and her death, living with immeasurable grief, and the lessons that we as society and individuals can learn from her story. So, Dan, Jill, I just wanted to thank both of you for joining me for this conversation. Like I was saying, before we started recording, I really appreciate what you all are doing. And I know when you've been through something like this, it would be very easy and understandable to walk away and never speak to anyone about it again, certainly not publicly, but that for some people, it's therapeutic and it's healing to be of service. And I appreciate how you've turned your loss. And like I said before, I don't even know what to say. But you've turned this giant loss for you into something that's having a positive impact on people, just like the woman I mentioned today, whose cousin was lost to a murder, and I was using you guys as an example of a way to be of service and channel some of that energy. So I wanted to at least start the conversation by thanking you, because you're giving the rest of us something that we don't deserve of you. And I just wanted to thank you for that.
Well, Jason, we also want to thank you for the opportunity to talk about our precious, beautiful daughter. Once people don't speak her name and listen to her stories, then she's really gone. So this gives us an opportunity to hold on to her for a little while longer. And we really love those opportunities. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I wanted to start by just mentioning something that I had read. I had read a story where Dan had talked about still having Morgan's computer and listening to the music files, the iTunes music files, the pictures still on there, the coursework. And in the story, there's one moment where they talk about how you still had her cell phone active so you could listen to her voice. And, I wanted to start out before we dive into the story to talk just about the process of your grief, how it's been going, and just any thoughts you have for people who are suffering.
Well, from my standpoint, you bring up that example, and I had forgotten it, to be honest with you. The police had Morgan's computer for several months, and when we got it, of course, there was, all the tape around it that, that they put on these things, and you couldn't get it off. And but I did go through, and Morgan was a great music lover, and she liked all types of music. So, some of the music I wasn't particularly fond of, but it brought me a little bit closer to her. And we did have her voice on her cell phone for a period of time, but we don't have that now. And I told Jill today, the only voice that we have of Morgan is one when she was with all of her girlfriends out at a lake here, and Morgan had never been water skiing before, and so they gave Morgan the chance to water ski, and she got up, and let me tell you, that girl was on her feet the entire time, and she was screaming and yelling, and it was just so nice. It's so nice, and I have that still. It's important. The process of the grief. Gosh, it's in a way, it's just kind of hard to even look back. It's been so many years, and I still can cry when I hear certain songs. And it's something that we, I think Jill and I both. I think this is an important point.
Yes.
When Morgan went missing, I went back to work fairly soon, and I was a mess. I could work, but when I came home, I was tearful a lot. And Jill was not tearful. And so, this was kind of weird for both of us. And in hindsight, what I think is, in a situation like ours, you have to grieve as individuals, but I think the success of continuing to be married and go forward, you have to also grieve as a couple.
And you have to give each other, you have to have understanding that there are different grief styles. And, Dan is a very sensitive man, and I have seen him cry. And I'm a sensitive person. I cried only once because it was such a tsunami of tears and primal screaming that I couldn't go there again, or I was afraid I would never stop.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
Dan would come in the door and fall into my arms and be crying. And I wanted him to be the strong support because I needed him now more than ever. And so we had to try and figure out how we were dealing with it differently and give each other that space. Once upon a time, Jason, we had a picture-perfect life. We had a beautiful, precious daughter. That picture was smashed into shards October 17th, 2009, when Morgan was murdered. What do you do with shards? Well, if you are very determined and creative, you can take the pieces, the shards of your picture, and reassemble them. It's no longer the same picture. Perhaps now it's an abstract mosaic, but it still can have beauty that will sustain you. You don't find happiness in a life. You make it. And it took some time for us to realize we had to relinquish the old life and build anew. You don't get over it, but you can get past it. I think that we are a testament to that. And I also believe that, the kind of the most basic tenet of my faith is there is a God. God is in all things, which means even our daughter's death had some tiny seeds of goodness that we could nurture and germinate. If we could just have faith and keep our thumb off the nozzle, some blessings would arrive. And they did.
Mm-hmm. It's a hard thing to even think about. And I think that, just going back to the original or the first point about grief, I think it's one of the things that was very hard for me to learn in life was not only do we grieve different ways, but we have expectations of what our grief is going to be like if there is a big loss. And those expectations are very often wrong. And then we get into our cycle of grief and we're looking at those around us and not understanding why they're not grieving. And I remember a father whose daughter disappeared and hasn't been found talked to me about his wife's experience. And, he had started a nonprofit to focus on disappearances and missing people. And he said, my way of grieving is to give back and keep fighting for other people's sons and daughters. And my wife's way of grieving, her healthiest way, and they did divorce, but he was speaking afterwards. Her healthy way was to pull away into her family. And he just gave me great advice. Never judge anyone for the way that they grieve. Not to give him any more credit than anyone else, but just let people grieve the way they do. And, Jill, I'm a real big believer in what you said. The hardest moments in life, often for people, and for me certainly, have produced some of the most powerful fruit. And, one of those things is pain and suffering. I really do believe lets you love people more deeply, because suffering is the one thing all of us share in common. It might not be the same, but I imagine it's allowed you to relate to people and connect with people and, thinking about the work you're doing with your nonprofit to love those girls and women you're trying to help in a deeper way than you would have been able to before.
Yes. And Dan spoke about different grief styles, but we both have great commonality in that we're caregivers. Dan is a physician, I'm a nurse, and service and caring is deeply embedded in our lives and our hearts. And so trying to assuage the grief that other people are feeling really was a way out of the abyss. I love this quote that I put on many things. I slept and dreamed that life was joy. I woke and saw that life was service. I acted, and behold, service is joy.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah. I think that is true. You think about something like the 12 steps in AA ends with service. So many things, so many processes, and with service, I think because it has a healing and it has this healthy power and this joyous power to be of service. Dan, you had mentioned Morgan and her music taste and a number of things about her personality. Before we go on, I wanted to, because I think sometimes it's really easy to talk about what happened in the aftermath, but we don't always get a good portrait. To your point, Jill, about the mosaic, the portrait of the person that was there. And, I was just wondering what Morgan, and I appreciated the insight that I got from reading your book. Seeing her letters were really interesting to me, hearing or reading about the anecdotes of her life and different things along that line. But what was Morgan like? Who was she?
Well, as I said at the funeral, Morgan was not a perfect child. And I think just like a lot of kids, I think the teenage years with Morgan were a bit rocky. And, Morgan went to Virginia Tech, which, is only, 35 miles from here. And, her first year, Morgan came home most weekends, and which was interesting because she probably wanted to get away, but she needed to come home. And for me, I started seeing kind of changes in her second year in college, and I would rather sort of tell you about kind of near the end, because I think that was the more important piece of Morgan's life. Morgan, the summer before Morgan's death, I called the magical summer. And Morgan actually worked with me. We started a new medical school with the local health system in Virginia Tech here, and I was one of the associate deans. And the building wasn't built, but Morgan was hired kind of as a lackey. She would do whatever that people asked. And we were both sort of concerned early on when she agreed to take the job that, oh my God, how are we going to get her up in the morning? And what we saw was that Morgan was on time, always. And she loved the job that she had.
Mm.
And that summer also, we had multiple vacations that were they were just great. And Morgan also had a whole cadre of friends here that, they would get together in the evenings. And that summer, Morgan stayed at home every night. She didn't go out with her friends. And so I remember taking Morgan back to Tech. Jill was actually in Zambia, and we had lunch in Blacksburg, and it was just such a neat thing to see Morgan mature and decide that she was going to be a teacher, and she had moved beyond the struggles, I think, that kids have, during those teenage years. And, of course, Morgan's life ended, but, we were also able, as Jill said, she started Help Save the Next Girl. I don't know whether you all talked about this or not, um, uh, but, because of Morgan's connection to the medical school and her connection to the dean and several other women that she saw as being successful, I think that helped Morgan decide she was going to be a teacher. And when her body was found, we decided to start a scholarship at the medical school. And so, we've raised it's about probably about $550,000, and we are able to provide one student for 4 years half of their tuition. And so, that to me was just such a wonderful way for us to be able to honor Morgan, and the school has been incredibly supportive of Morgan.
I think the Morgan Harrington Memorial Scholarship at the Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine is an example of some really elegant circularity that, as a direct response to our family's injury, we are returning healers into the community. And in so doing, we neutralize evil.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like a gift that Morgan gave us, right?
Parents often speak of deceased children of legacy, wanting to create legacy. And you don't want to create legacy for reasons of hubris. You want to create legacy so the huge potential that your child had is not wasted, is not poured like water into the sand. So you try and realize some of their dreams in absentia.
So it's sort of like these things are sort of like carrying the ball for her.
Yes. I'll tell you another story. So I don't often descend into self-pity, but occasionally I have a wobble. And I was having one such wobble and seeing my neighbors across the way playing with their grandkids, and they were planning a daughter's wedding. And I said, all I've got is this box of Morgan's ashes sitting here. I've got ashes. And then I realized I could pull up my socks, and if you have ashes, you can make cinder blocks. And if you got cinder blocks, you can build. And we built a beautiful school, the Morgan Harrington Educational Wing in Zambia, Africa, where I worked with a medical team. And hundreds of children, more than Morgan could ever have taught if she lived to a ripe old age, are being educated in her honor to participate in the enfranchised Africa of tomorrow. And that potential, it has been exponentially increased through her Africa school.
Yeah, I had never really thought of that idea that when we lose someone, although relatable for me, when I think about my own experiences of loss, that we have an opportunity to grab that baton that they were carrying. I had mentioned that my mother had died recently. It was in 2023, but I remember that same sense, after the initial stage of grief, where she was a love teacher and mentor to people. And I felt this sense, this almost like obligation that I needed to, and all the best things about me, come from my mother. I firmly believe that. But that I needed to pick up the baton that she carried for 80 plus years, and I needed to run with it. Mm-hmm. And it's something, I don't think I did it to heal, but it has helped with the healing, but it's brought me such joy. And I feel conflicted sometimes, and I was going to ask you about that. Because I feel like some days I should feel bad for feeling good. Um, what is it? Is it mixed emotion to do these good things and have these good things come out of something so tragic?
I think it's necessary. I have not felt the feels bad to feel good feeling that you describe. Maybe early on it was maybe you felt a little guilty. How can I have this little spark of joy? But they were seldom then. They're much more present now.
How about you, Dan?
I agree with Jill. I don't think. I mean, I think I'm proud that we were able to do the things that we did, and and in hindsight, Jill and I talk about this, and in hindsight, we know of multiple people who had missing kids before, around Morgan's time and later, and just as you mentioned earlier, almost all those people ultimately ended in divorce. And that's part of what I think, getting back to what I said of grief, I think if a couple can't grieve as a couple, I I think that's what pulls people apart. They can't figure out, how do we have a commonality somewhere here? We're both grieving. We're grieving in different ways. And how do I get out of this? Well, I'm going to go have an affair, or I'm going to I'm going to divorce, and we're going to move away, because I think that's the easiest way that people, some people can move on. That they just can't stay within the marriage because they don't know how to relate to each other anymore.
Yeah, I like that concept and that idea of grieving together. How did you guys figure out how to do that?
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to bring this in, and it fits in exactly where we are when Morgan's body was found. I mean, when Morgan went missing, and we went to the University of Virginia, and we met with the police for the entire day. And at the end of the day, they said, we want you to go out the back. There are all kinds of TV cameras out front, and it'll just be better if you don't do that. And Jill and I both just said, no way. We want to have a message to Morgan. And so we went to the and we had a press conference, and I cried in that press conference. We asked Morgan to come home if she could hear us. If the other person who took her seen this, please let her go. And I think we had both sort of a light go off in our heads that, oh my God, this is the only thing we can do for Morgan. We can't go search. It could be anywhere, but we can get the message out. And I think in the first 30 days, we turned only one person down for an interview. And there were some days that we had 2 and 3 interviews. And I think that was the beginning of how she and I worked together. And, she would say one thing, I would say another thing, and we were able to sort of complement each other and move beyond. Don't you think that's true, Jill?
Well, we knew it was ours to do, and no one else could do it.
Yeah. And it really painted a picture of her and gave people important pieces of information. But I imagine for you all, having something that you could work together as a team on was beneficial. And I still remember that press conference, which I saw. And I think it's this press conference. Is that the macaroni and cheese press conference? Where Jill made a comment about, I think somebody had asked a question or made a statement related to, level of concern over her disappearance, and you made that comment about how Morgan would call every other day with something like how to make macaroni and cheese. If you like read the back of the box. And that something about that was just so endearing, and it stuck with me for years.
It was an odd time to how do you learn to we don't know that we put up these barriers between us as humans, and we needed to be and wanted to be as accessible and transparent in our anguish to the community writ large, to solicit information for the police that might lead to the return of our daughter. And it also was a time of our transparency. Who would ever have thought that no one wants to be the poster child for rape, abduction, and murder, but we were. And I think that was a very good thing because we are very regular people, and we took some of the stigma away from the people thinking this only happens to bad girls in other places.
Right.
And we would say, this happens right here. People would say, oh, the person who took her must have been a drifter. Said, no, local talent. That person knows this town. That's local talent. And Morgan was a good girl. So bad things happen to nice girls in nice places, just like Charlottesville, just like Roanoke, just like Lexington. It happens everywhere.
Yeah, and we know from the case itself, it could have been anyone that night. And same thing with the Hannah Graham case. It could have been anyone, any of the many people that he attempted to encounter. I do want to ask you guys about the day you found out, but I almost want to jump ahead because this connects to the question of grief. One thing I had noticed in reading the news reports, Jill, you were often at the court hearings and other events, and Dan, you weren't there. And one of the things that I was wondering, was that a part of that grief journey and respecting what the other needed? Or tell me about that part. How you guys decided what you were going to engage in and not engage in. How'd you decide what would be healthy? Because I imagine there's a part internally for everyone to say, I need to support my spouse and everything on every piece of this. But it may not always be the healthy thing.
Jason, I think you just hit the nail on the head. Support. Dan was back at work.
I was working
for 2 weeks after Morgan was killed. And he has always a very busy, heavy schedule and workload. So he was not available to go to court dates. He was in the hospital working. That as simple as that.
And it gave you another way that you could operate as, I think, a team. One of the things I was just sort of wondering about, I had read, and this may have been in the book, about the day that a farmer found Morgan's remains. And that was in January after she disappeared in October. And in that period in between, were you still holding on to hope?
Jason, I felt on Sunday when I heard that Morgan was missing, Morgan was dead. You know, Morgan would not have run away. I think, Jill, you held out hope.
You know, you have a lot of magical thinking, and we both agree that the 100 days that Morgan was missing were the hardest of all. You know, you are trying to simultaneously brace for the death of your child, and yet you're trying to not give up on her and and allow the possibility that she might still be alive and return home. I Yeah, you have some magical thinking, but there came a point when I did internally say to Morgan, if you if you decide that you are in such a bad spot that checking out and leaving this planet is your best option, go for it. I release you. We will take on the pain of being without you.
I remember reading in her obituary the first line that the world had lost the best hugger. She was a good hugger.
Yeah, she was. She was a big hugger for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. It really sounds like, from what you were saying, she was very much coming into her own, and those last few years gave you guys a roadmap for some of what you ended up doing in the future. But I wanted to ask you again, I remember reading in the book that you were notified, and the way that you were notified was not by the police. And that you had, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, but you had received a call from a reporter asking for comment on the remains being found. Not the ideal situation. Then you had called law enforcement and you wanted to go out to the site on the farm. I wanted to ask you about that, and also working with law enforcement, what that experience was like, and if you have any advice for people who find themselves in similar situations.
Well, I think all along the police said that when Morgan's body was found, it would likely be found by a hunter or a fisherman, something like that. And that when it happened, that they would come and that they would escort us to the site. Nah, no. And so, Henry Graff, who was one of our very supportive reporters from WVIR in Charlottesville, called me and he said, "What do you think about Morgan's? They think Morgan's body has been found." And I said, "I haven't heard anything about this." And so we do get in touch with the police, and and I'll let Jill talk about once we get to Charlottesville, because it's her story.
It's funny because Morgan had been missing for 100 days, and yet hearing that they had found her body, we felt like we had to fly over Afton Mountain to get there. It was almost like a magnet pulling us there. And though Dan says that he had internally believed that Morgan was dead from the first day, he had a tad of that magical thinking also, because he carried always in his car for those 100 days a sports bag. He said, if they find Morgan and bring her back and she's alive, she's gonna need something soft, and her favorite sweatshirt and a blanket and some things to make her feel comfortable on the ride home. And he took that bag out of his car before we went to Charlottesville. Yeah.
Jill needs to complete the story, but Jill said the period of missing was so hard. It really was much harder, I think, than us finding that Morgan was dead. I wouldn't wish those 101 days on my worst enemy. I mean, it was hell.
Jason, there are no rituals for the missing. Someone's dead, you have a funeral. There's no cards at Hallmark for the missing. It's really an odd state of limbo that there's no path of how to get through it. You don't really know what to do, and the people around you don't know what to do. It's really a very helpless feeling.
An ambiguous kind of grief.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're grieving.
And you're afraid to grieve it because maybe that'll make it true then.
Yeah. And, thinking about that thing we were talking about, how people don't know what to say when you lose someone, they most certainly don't know what to say when someone's missing.
Yeah. Something that I have found, so my background was as an oncology nurse, and have interacted with a lot of death situations in that role. I think that there are no perfect words, but even inadequate and stilted words that are authentic, they suffice. It's when you don't know what to say, and instead of giving something authentic from your core, you give a platitude. She's in a better place. That falls short. But authentic words, even awkward ones, are okay. They work. They bring
Something about, that idea of someone's quiet presence, just knowing that you may not know what to say, you may not know what to do for someone, but I'm sure it's of some comfort for people who are in your situation to just know someone is there for whatever it is you need, which might change by the minute.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that I wonder about that period where Morgan is missing, looking at it from the outside, and you brought up that idea of, Dan, that you wouldn't have wished those 100 days on your worst enemy. And Jill, you brought up, the complexity of what it felt like. Is there advice that you would have to people who are trying to support someone whose loved one is missing, whether it's a short-term or long-term missing? Is there something, it's so hard to imagine, so hard to put ourselves in their shoes, but what is it we can do beyond maybe the words to be supportive, or even if it is the words?
It's hard. Some things are pretty basic. Our community and our neighborhood, they just enveloped us with compassion and love. When you're part of that Southern Lady Casserole Brigade, it doesn't seem like a big thing when you're making the casseroles, but when you are gobsmacked and you can't even think of how to get dressed and function in a day, and people are bringing food that you just have to open the refrigerator and it's there, that's a real good practical help. They sustained us for months. That's helpful. Just the kind, people would come and leave flowers by our bird feeders and say, we just left a flower and a prayer for Morgan. It's really whatever gifts are in your heart, those are the ones to spread as much as you can.
Dan, you alluded to this, that the police did not keep their promise to take you to wherever she was found. And I know you had a dispute with them over visiting the site, and then ultimately they showed you some pictures and you flew that helicopter ride over the site. I remember seeing the pictures in the I think it was in the newspaper, it may have been on TV, but I think it was in the newspaper in the days afterwards, of how vast that area was. What was that helicopter ride like? What were your thoughts then?
Well, I think it was I think it was a compromise and inadequate, but um, I honestly think we raised a heck of a stink over it, and I think they decided that we needed to have something. I'll let Jill tell about, once we got to the police station in Charlottesville, because this is an important piece of this.
Yeah, so we arrived there at the police headquarters, the state police headquarters, and we said we want to go where Morgan's body is, and they said, no, you can't go there. It's a crime scene. And I said, well, we won't go past the tape, but we really feel a need as her parents to be where her body lay. And they said, you can't go. And I said, well, media has been there all day and we'll go with them. And they said, no, if you go there, we will have you arrested. And
wow.
I said, if you have me arrested, I'm not going easy, and it's going to be on TV. At which point
they dismissed the meeting and went to talk about all this stuff.
Calmer heads prevail.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine what the front page, one half of the front page about the case, and one man. I'm glad calmer heads prevailed.
Something that the question you asked just a few minutes ago about where could you tell someone else? And every case is so different, but Jill and I think we're lucky, and I'm not sure Jill's very articulate. I'm not very articulate, but
yeah,
I think we're educated. We knew the only thing we could do was we needed to keep Morgan's case out there, because what we had seen is that these kind of cases just die because families are in turmoil. They don't know what to do. And for us, we were like a machine, honestly, for that first month, for 6 weeks. We said no to just almost, some days we were on TV 3 or 4 times. We could go to Charlottesville. This was years later. Literally 8 years later, we could call the stations in Charlottesville and say, we're going to be at the bridge in Charlottesville. And we'd have 3 TV stations there.
Huh.
We developed this kind of friendship with folks, and you want to tell people, who are in these situations, do something, but, people are just paralyzed, and we weren't.
We had the benefit of a skill set and training from our professions. As caregivers, you can't give in to your emotions when a patient is terribly sick or it's a cardiac arrest. You have the ability to compartmentalize your emotions and do the tasks at hand. And we were able to use those skills and do the task at hand, which is keep Morgan's information and solicit tips from the community to try and find where she is and bring her back.
There's another medicine metaphor that I think is apt, and it's, as caregivers in the medical field, you probably know this, that there's an element to your care that is going to be based on your own advocacy or your advocacy for your loved one and the questions you ask and pushing. And I think, I hear this often where people will say in the beginning, I thought the police would just carry the ball and I'd let them do whatever it was. But it seems like for you all and for others, it's been really important that you let the police do their job, but there's a job for you to do.
See that this is very interesting because really from pretty much the beginning, even the first day when they said, you guys slide out the back, and we said,
No.
You guys are going to solicit from this community information about our daughter. Who can be more compelling making that request than the parents? We're speaking. And I liken it very much to, again, a medical situation. 40, 50 years ago, fathers were smoking cigars while their babies were being born out in the waiting room. And, today, papas are in the obstetrical suite and they're cutting umbilical cords. They're not obstetricians, but they have a role. And I would use that example to the police. And I said, this is not your case. This is our case too. We are not investigators, but we are fully participatory in our role as parents.
And Jason, one of the things that occurred very early on in Charlottesville is that, I was thinking, how do we go forward here?
I think we're going to stop there for this week, and we'll be back next week for the rest of this conversation. If you would like to join us for more discussions with me and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, you can also join us at our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you guys all again in a few days.